Hello my dear students. In the previous session we had learned about Boyce's views on his early reading, literary reading, and about his mother and about blindness. In today's class we will learn about his opinion regarding books and then poetry. So first we will discuss about book or theme of book. The next question or further question asked by Alfano to Borges. There is a theme I would like us to speak about, the theme of books. What do you mean by theme? Theme means nothing but idea or submatter. What was the theme of book? Is there any particular theme of book? Alfano question Boyce. Well, last night, in fact, I had a very strange dream. So while he was explaining about a theme of book, Boyce explained about his dream. He had a dream in the previous night. What was the dream he had? I dreamed of the burning of a great library, which I believe may have been the Library of Alexandria, with its countless volumes attacked by flames. Alexandria, Library of Alexandria, which is in Egypt. So Library of Alexandria, located in Egypt, was one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world. So what kind of dream he had in the previous night? He had a strange dream. What was that? He had dreamt the volumes of books attacked by flames. Flames means fire. So that means here in the dream of Boyce, Library of Alexandria attacked by flames. It was burning. Do you believe this dream may have some meaning? Boyce questioned Alfano whether the dream, whatever he had dreamt in the previous night, whether it had a meaning. Alfano, perhaps. Boyce, could it be that you owe your readers a book on the history of the book? Have you ever thought of writing such a book? Alfano, might be. Whatever the dream he had in the previous night, might be had some meaning. So while he was listening whatever Boyce explained about the theme of book, Alfano understood might be Boyce who was talking about book on the history of the book. And here O means give or seek. Whether Boyce was ready to give his readers a book on the history of the book. And he questioned whether ever he thought of writing such a book. It is very highly difficult for a person to write book on the history of the book. Whether Boyce thought about this, Alfano questioned Boyce. Boyce, dear me, no, but it is an excellent idea. It would be wonderful to write a history of book. See, though he was aged person, though it is highly impossible for Boyce to write on the history of the book, nowhere he said no. He said that it was an excellent idea. Definitely he would keep it on his mind. So such kind of optimistic a character or nature Boyce had. Although I don't know if an 83 years old man can set such a project for himself. How old was Boyce during this interview? Who was 83 years old. So here Boyce said that he don't know whether it is possible for 83 years old to take such kind of project, because which is a great project to take. He don't know whether it is possible for him to do or not, but who said that definitely if it is possible for him to do that, he'll try. However, I now remember that Spengler in his Decline of the West predates my attempt, for in it he writes remarkable comments on books. While he was explaining about that, who recalled the work of Spengler. Spengler, German philosopher, and who already predates means who already attempted. Precede. Spengler in his work Decline of the West, who already precedes his attempt. So here we could see he made a remarkable comments on books. So in the Decline of the West, Spengler had made a comments on books. So you will get it for 1 mark. Work of Spengler, Decline of the West. Here we could see he made comments on books. Alifano. In one of your essays, you quote the words of Bernard Shaw. Every book worth being read has been written by the spirit. So here spirit means a person and then his intention. So in one of his essay, Boyce had quoted words of Bernard Shaw, that is, every book worth being read has been written by the spirit. So while author or any writer is writing, he fulfilled his thought, his dream through writing in a book. So what was Boyce's opinion regarding that? Yes, I completely concur with that notion. Concur means agree. Notion means idea. Since a book goes beyond its author's intention, the author's intention is a meager thing, a fallible thing. Yes, he completely agree with the idea of Bernard Shaw, whatever he had written, because a book goes beyond its author's intention. So that means author he had written with his own intention, whereas while the reader reading it, sometimes we can't able to go to that point. His intention won't reach a reader. So that means the intention what author has written may not be the same when the reader reads it. Because for that reason he said that, Boyce said that intention of author a meager means kevala or fallible. So sometimes a fallible too, faulty too. In a book, in every book, there is a need for something more which is always mysterious. Mysterious means unknown quality. In any book, while we are reading, we need something more, but which is unknown quality. That means which is always mysterious, what we expect. When we read an ancient book, it is as though we were reading all time that has passed from the day it was written to our present day. Yes, we felt like that. What we felt while we are reading ancient book? We thought that as if we had written to our present day, or whatever that had written in that ancient book, we thought that as if the same thing which is happening. So that means what we called history repeats. The same thing would happen while we are reading ancient book. A book can be full of errors. We can reject its author's opinions, disagree with him or her, but the book always retains something sacred, something mortal, something magical which brings happiness. A book should bring happiness. That is the ultimate function of writing. So here, a book might be full of errors. So that means faults are there. Though a book having faults or errors, we can reject the intention of author, whereas we can't able to reject the book, because book always considered as sacred, mortal. Mortal means vital, important, which retain means which keep, and magical, which brings happiness. That is the ultimate function of writing a book. This is the opinion regarding a book. Now we will move on to the poetry. Next question asked by Alfano to Borges. Alfano, Borges, what is poetry? How would you define it? Borges, I believe that poetry is something so intimate, so essential that it cannot be defined without oversimplifying it. The next question asked by Alfano was, what is poetry according to Borges? How he going to define poetry? According to Borges, poetry which is so intimate, very close, and which is essential and which cannot be defined without oversimplifying it. So poetry, without oversimplifying, one can't able to define. So this is the definition of poetry. Keep that in your mind. You might have get it for 1 mark. So what is poetry according to Borges? Poetry is something so intimate, so essential that it cannot be defined without oversimplifying it. That is the definition of. It would be like attempting to define the color yellow, love, and the fall of leaves in the autumn. So if we're going to define without oversimplifying means, it would be like defining color yellow. Is it possible for us to define yellow or love? No, which is like a abstract now. So we can't able to feel the color yellow or love, whereas we can't able to see or we can't able to touch it. The same way here also poetry, we can feel what is poetry, or while we are reading poetry we can understand or we can feel, whereas we can't able to define without oversimplifying it. And the fall of leaves in the autumn means, what's the reason behind it? That is the natural phenomena. I believe that poetry is the aesthetic act. What do you mean by aesthetic? Beautiful. That poetry is not the poem. For the poem may be nothing more than a series of symbols. So here, according to Borges, poetry is nothing but an aesthetic act, which is not like a poem. There is a lot of difference between poem and poetry. So according to Borges, poem is nothing but a series of symbols. By reading once we can able to understand poem, whereas poetry we can't, because which itself having inner meaning and then outer meaning, and without oversimplifying we can't able to define it. Poetry, I believe, is the poetic act that takes place when the poet writes it, when the reader reads it, and it always happens in a slightly different manner. So here, which is very important, you might have get it for 1 mark. When does the poetic act happen according to Boyers? If you get that question, you need to answer. When the poetic act happens when the poet writes it, when the reader reads it, and it always happens in a slightly different manner. So that means the idea, whatever the poet had written, that should connect, reach the soul of the reader. Then the poetic act or the aesthetic act takes place. When the poetic act takes place, it seems to me that we become aware of it. Yes. When the poetic act or aesthetic act that happens in the mind of the reader, then the reader became aware of what is poetry. Poetry is a magical, mysterious and unexplainable, although not incomprehensible event. That means another definition of poetry given by Boyers means poetry that is magical, mysterious and unexplainable. So, which is unexplainable and which is a magical. So that means what we call magic which had in the poetry, and mysterious, unknown qualities we could see in the poetry, and which is not incomprehensible means which is comprehensible. So poetry, though which is magical, mysterious, unexplainable, but which is comprehensible event. If one doesn't feel the poetic event upon reading it, the poet has failed. When the poetic act or aesthetic act doesn't take place means in that situation poet had failed. This is a brief explanation about poetry. So which is very important to, if you get it for 4 marks, you need to write 3 definitions given by Boyers. So that means which also intimate, essential. We can't able to define without oversimplifying it, which is aesthetic act or poetic act. That means beautiful act. When the poetic act takes place, when the poet writes it, reader reads it, and it always happens in a slightly different manner. And another definition, poetry means magical, mysterious, unexplainable, but which is comprehensible event. And another thing, there is a lot of difference between poetry and poem. Poem is nothing but series of symbols. This is the explanation of poetry. Okay, I'll stop here, and before that we will be summing up whatever we had learned today. So in today's class, we learned about the theme of book. So while he was explaining about the theme of book, he was explaining about the Library of Alexandria, which was attacked by flames of fire, and book on the history of the book. So Alifano questioned whether Boyers, who was ready to give his reader book on the history of the book, and while he was explaining about this, Boyers recalled Spengler's Decline of the West, because who already precedes his attempt, because here he had written comments on book. And he also explaining about, while we are reading an ancient book, we thought that as if it had returned to our present day, and though book was having errors, we can't able to reject the book. We can reject the intention of author, because book always keep sacred, mortal, magical, and which brings happiness. That is the ultimate function of a book or writing. Then come to the poetry. Poetry means 3 definitions you should mention, which is so intimate, essential, we can't able to define without oversimplifying it, which is a aesthetic act or beautiful act or poetic act, and which is poetry is magical, mysterious, unexplainable, but which is comprehensible event, and the difference between poem and poetry. So these are the things you should mention if you get it for 4 mark. I hope you understood. So remaining we will see in the next session. Thank you.